Hello, welcome to another lecture on in C language, and today we are discussing about a topic called functions, which is unit 4 in our syllabus. So functions. So before we start understanding about functions, from day one when we started writing our programs in C language, we learnt about this word called function. Example, the first function that we all looked at is main, next is printf, next is scanf. After a while, we talked about SQRT. After a while, we also talked about CLR, SCR. Then we also talked about getCH. We talked about lot more and so on. Getis, putis, power. We have seen a lot of functions. We have used the name called function, and we have seen a lot of functions like this. But essentially, it's time for us to actually study in depth about what is a function, what does all that mean for us in a C language. So we start our discussion today with functions. So what is a function? So before we start understanding function, we need to understand a term called modular programming. So what is modular programming? Modular programming is a concept of breaking a complex task into subprograms, so on. This concept of breaking a complex problem, complex task into smaller subparts is known as modular programming. Even in real-time industry, all the people do not work on a same program or a same file. They tend to break up a complex project into small parts. Each person executes a part, and all the solutions integrated will get the final output. So this concept of breaking down a complex problem into small subtasks is known as modular programming. What are these subtasks known as? The subtasks are known as functions. They are also known as subprograms. They are also called as modules. Or they are also called as subtasks. A task is a program or a process under execution, and if a task is divided into small parts, they are called as subtasks, modules, functions, or subprograms. And now we will going to study the definition of what is called a function. So essentially, functions in C are something that help us to reduce our job, to reduce a complex job into smaller parts. So how are functions divided in C? In C, functions are divided into two types. The first one is predefined functions, and the next one is user-defined functions. Pre is already, before. If something is already defined for the by the machine for the user, then it is called as predefined functions. And if something is needed to be defined or coded by the user, then it is called as user-defined functions. So we'll get into action and study more in depth about what is a function and what are its basics. What are the basics we need to know to start using functions or subprograms or modules in our C coding. So what does functions do? So here we go. What is a function? So the ability to divide a program into abstract reusable pieces, which makes it possible to work with larger programs. Actually, if I can't work with a larger program, the process or the ability to break it down into abstract means simple, reusable means which can be used for a lot of times, many times, so is known as a function. So how do you define a function? A function is a self-contained block of code that does a specific work. If I'm intended to do a specific work and that is done by some part of an instructions or some piece of a code, then that is essentially called as a function. So we start with understanding why do you need such functions in your coding. So as we already discussed, when I have a large program, it becomes very difficult for us to understand the flow. Imagine 1,000 lines of program. You don't understand what happened in 500th line when you are at 700th line. It is also extremely difficult to understand the errors in that code. So for all these various kind of reasons, it is better if the program is divided into small subparts where each part bothers about one specific thing rather than it being generalized. So therefore, let us understand the reasons that makes functions extremely useful and practically essential. Enhances readability. Increases readability is the ability to read and understand. So yes, functions essentially promote readability. They increase readability of a program. easy to understand. They make the code pretty simple. Because they divide it into small parts, each part becomes clearly understandable. They allow code reusability. You can use it, you only write it once, but you can use it many a times. It provides a structured organization. It defines a finite way of organizing stuff. It achieves modular programming. That's what we have discussed. Modules is breaking into smaller, simpler tasks. Identification of bugs. Imagine my program has several separate parts. If there is a mistake only in calculation, I can just go to a function which calculates my processes my data and verify there. So it easily makes debugging clear. So next is data abstraction. Abstraction is a process of hiding all the unnecessary details and just projecting the outer details. So it functions essentially provide that. Next, reduction of code repetition. In other words, it reduces lines of code. Rather than writing a piece of code n number of times, you write it only once and use it 10 times. So therefore, obviously, it reduces lines of code. Best suited for larger or complex programs. Everything goes well when the program is simple, small in number of lines. But once when the program becomes complex and large number of lines, it obviously becomes very difficult for all of us to understand the flow, to find out the bugs, to probably analyze it, etc. So therefore, whenever you have a large program or a large task to execute, it is always good to break it up into modules and start working on it. So yes, this is how it is used to check logical conditions involving multiple objects and returns result. So you can easily identify where did it went wrong. From process 1 to process 2 to process 3, the translation becomes smoother. Therefore, these are all the reasons that allow us to have something called as modular programming into practice, which we call it as functions. So how do we essentially start defining a function? So a function is a program. A function is a set of code that does a specific work. So how do you define or how do you divide functions in C? In C, majorly, the functions are divided into two types. One is predefined functions and the other is user-defined functions. So how do you define a predefined function? A predefined functions are nothing but the standard library functions supported by language C. They are declared in the headers of the library. They are available, their body is available in the DLL files, and they are just used by the user. You need to just use them. You need not bother about their implementation details. On the other hand, whose code is made by the user, whose name is defined by the user, whose logic is written by the user, everything is called a user-defined function. If I have a specific functionality to be done in my program, then we can have an option of using a user-defined function, and we can all write it and use it in our C program. C also supports user-defined functions, and also C has the capability to add up all these user-defined functions to the C libraries, making user-defined libraries as well. So therefore, this is about the predefined versus user-defined functions in C. So in order to use a predefined function, you need to just know the header file in which it is listed, the name of the function, the inputs it takes, and the output it gives. That's it. We need not bother anything about the implementation of that function. On the other hand, in order to use a user-defined function, you have to know the name of, you have to give a name to the function, you have to declare it, you have to define the code, you have to use it, you have to call it, you have to also write the logic for it. So all these needs to be taken care by the user. So here we go. Let us see an example for a user-defined function. So a function is essentially a group of statements that performs a specific task. So the standard function that all of us know is a main function. So main is a user-defined function in C. It can see inputs through command line. Main also can return a value back to the processor to check out its execution. So this is how we see an user-defined function. There are a large number of user-defined functions which are listed in predefined libraries. Example string.h has strcpy, strcmp, strcat, stdio.h has printf, scanf, gets, puts, math.h has square root, power, leaf, floor, etc. So these are all standard library functions. To use a standard library function, this is an important point. If you want to use a standard library function, you need to know the name of the function, you need to know the header file in which the function is listed, you need to know the input, the type and the order, and you also need to know the return type of the function. So here there is a small discussion that we need to make. Why is inputs order very important when we talk about standard functions? So we all know that there is a function called POW in math.h. POW is a power function which is available in math.h. So therefore we all write hash include math.h. Power, if I want to find out x power y, the ideal way of writing is power of x comma y, where the first one is base and the second one is radix or power. But if you don't know the order, and if we end up writing power of y comma x, it calculates y power x rather than calculating x power y. So therefore, whenever we use functions, it is extremely important to understand the order in which a particular function takes input. Example, there is another example which I can quote in this process. There is a function called strcpy which is available in string.h, a predefined function which copies the second string into the first string. So imagine if my second string is empty. Imagine there's nothing in S2 and there is some data in S1. What happens in this process is that nothing or garbage of S2 gets copied into S1, and both S1 and S2 tend to lose their data, which makes the function useless. So whenever you use a library function, it is very essential for all of us to understand what does the function take as input and what kind of inputs does it take. So what is the order in which it takes the input. So these all needs to be remembered by all of us. So this is an example where we are using. So these are a few header files. std.h, printf, scanf, getchar, putchar, getis, stdlib.h is exit, string.h is concat, copy, length, corner.h is clear screen and getch, ctype.h is alpha, is num, is all num, is lower, etc. These are a few functions, and this is how I made use of predefined function. strlen of India will give me 5 as the answer because India is a 5-letter word. sqrt of 2 will give you square root of 2, it is 1.4142. Power of 5 comma 3 is 5 power 3, which is 125, and 2 lower of small b will get you the lower version, the lower case of capital B, which is small b. So this is an example which shows us how to use predefined functions in C. So coming back to predefined functions, on the other hand of predefined functions, there's something else called as user-defined function. So what is a user-defined function? So user-defined function in C language is a function which is defined by the user for his purpose. So a block of code that does a specific work is known as a user-defined function. So what are all the essential elements of a user-defined function? A user-defined function has 3 essential elements: function declaration, function definition, and function call. Function declaration follows the same syntax. Function declaration has function return type of the function, function name followed by the list of inputs it takes. Function definition is the place where you write the logic of that particular function, and function header is a place where you try to define the function. So for example, this is called the signature of a function, which is a very, very important topic in exam point of view. Most of the times it might be asked as a 2 marks question as well, so we need to be ready with the answer. So what does a user define signature of a function? Signature of a function contains the return type of the function. What is the return type of the function? Return type of the function is the value that is expected back from the function. If the function returns nothing, we write void, otherwise we write some name. Name of the function is any user-defined function name which follows all the rules of variables. Parameters are inputs to the function, so whatever you want to give inputs to the function, you write it in the list of parameters. Any subprogram will have, functions are also called as subprograms, so therefore any subprogram will have declarations, or we call it as local declarations, followed by executable statements and an optional return value. Executable statements is any statement in C language that does some computation or that does some processing, and then optional return value or an optional return statement that the function would return back to the calling function. So this is about the signature of a function. A signature of a function contains the return type of a function, the function name, and the list of parameters, followed by local declarations, executable statement, and the return value. In other words, signature of the function, you can also call it as function definition. Where are user-defined functions defined in C? C follows a top-down approach, so therefore the user-defined functions are defined in the subprogram section after the main program. So we will, in another lecture, we'll see an example of defining user-defined functions. But for now, remember that a user-defined function has got a lot of advantages, and it is used to enhance readability, reduce complexity of a problem, and this is defined in a place after the main program to support the operations. So good day. Thank you.